part of what you got to realize is while Scarface was the Southern rapper that people were willing to acknowledge was good, it's still a lot of hateration, holleration of Southern rap. Mainstream press, of course, still barely understood rap generally, let alone Southern rap, which seemed totally foreign to a lot of people. The year is 1994, and hip-hop has cemented itself into the mainstream. In this series, we'll be discussing why this year is regarded as one of the greatest years in the history of rap. From New York icons like Nas and Biggie to the arrival of Southern rap in the form of Outkast or UGK, 94 was one of the biggest years in rap music. We'll look back at these classic albums, sharing why they're so great and why their impact meant so much to the culture. All right, man, let's get to it.
Before we get to the actual album, because this is Scarface's third album, who was Scarface leading up to this moment?
Scarface is probably the first Southern rapper that this country ever treated with a legitimate level of respect. And they treated him with that level of respect for two reasons. One, he was in the Ghetto Boys, and the Ghetto Boys did My Mind's Playing Tricks on Me. And that was the number one song in rap in the year 1991, right? It didn't matter where those dudes were from. At a time where a rapper from the South almost seemed like an alien to most people. That was different. That one took the world by storm. Don't even get me started about Houston. They once had the top 5 countdown, and it was number 1 and number 2. It was when nobody even calling in to talk about anything other than My Mind's Playing Tricks on Me. So Scarface was that guy who by that time had a legitimate classic under his belt as a solo artist of Mr. Scarface is Back and a good enough record with the next one, The World Is Yours. But by the time The Diary comes around, this is one of the top rappers in the game at a time where what you've seen happen with the West Coast has broadened out the map a little bit. So yeah, it's the East Coast and it's the West Coast. But that then gave room to fill in the sound in the middle in those places that felt a little more like the West Coast, like Houston did in terms of the music and what the sound was. Now the world is paying even more attention to that. So he's a dude that's going platinum by the time you get to this. And now this is probably his first really, really big LP that came out. And everybody was like, hey, man, you heard that new Scarface?
Were you in Houston when this dropped? Were you able to experience the Texasness of this record?
I was in Houston when this comes out, but I'm from the North Side, and this is a very South Side record, and the North Side and the South Side are basically two different places. And I went to school outside of the city, so this is a third place, right? So in a lot of ways, I'm like 2 places removed, but the real place where I'm removed from it is in the 1990s, around this time, from like 93 to 95, you got a lot of rap music that's about death and people dying. You had a song by this group called DRS, the Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, called Gangsterlean, where they just sang a song. It was a funeral dirge, basically. That was a top 10 pop hit. 1995 comes around and you get the remix version of Crossroads by Bone Thugs and Harmony. That becomes a number 1 pop single. They be playing that at basketball games, the intro of it. And I'm like, do you realize you've saddened up the whole arena because this song is all about dying, right? The 1990s, particularly the early portion of it, were marked by incredibly high rates of crime relative to the history of this country and lots of people being murdered, lots of people dying. And so what Scarface was doing with this record and a lot of the things that you heard come out, it was really about this proximity to dying that I admit did not mean that much to my life personally because I didn't know that many people. He got a line on this album where he said, I went to so many wakes in the I went to more wakes in the past year than the motherfucker Bengals lost last year. Bengals used to be really sorry. But anyway, that was not my life, but that was the life for a lot of America. And this record spoke right to it.
So then this album comes out. What was your immediate reception? What did you love about it?
Okay, so the thing about The Diary is this. This is when Scarface really rolls out what I call the voice of death. Like if you check out the NPR Tiny Desk that he did, he talks about recording I Seen a Man Die, and just the way that the whole room turned up when his voice did the first line of the song. It's a real bellowing tone that he's got that goes through the whole thing, that speaks with an authority that goes beyond just catching your attention. It sounds like it's coming from another world. He assumes that persona from the beginning to the end of the record. And what it taps into is something that really is a hallmark of his work, even though that's largely defined by this album, is a certain fascination with death. but not in a like rebel without a cause sort of way, not in a who cares if you die, more of a we're all going to die. There's absolutely nothing to fear. And there's an exploration of the idea of it on this album, basically from track to track. What became so eerie, and part of what makes this such an amazing and such a chilling album, is this familiarity with death that Scarface seems to have seems to be very strange for a man who's alive. He talked about death like he knew it. He talked about death like he'd seen it. And he's got stories in his autobiography that would lead you to believe, at the very least, that he believes that he has seen death in these ways. But what jumps out so much about this is it is at times a terrifying record, but also when you listen to it, you realize and you hear the point is not to be terrifying, actually. The point of this is to be comforting and to get you to the place of a realization that, hey, there's really nothing you can do to stop this. Don't try to fight the reaper. Just relax and let it go. That's kind of what the point of this is. At a time where death and dying was at the forefront for a lot of people. Tupac, of course, being the classic example of a dude who just talked about dying all the time. Like what he saw led him to believe that it was right around the corner. It felt that same way with Scarface, except for the fact that it's 30 years later and he's still alive.
Let's talk about production. It's got some crazy beats from N.O. Joe and Mike Dean. What sticks out to you?
So I always say that when people start talking about East Coast and West Coast and rap, and at this time, it stops being a distinction and it basically winds up being you got to pick a side. The South existed in a fairly neutral space. However, sonically, I have always contended that the West Coast started at the Mississippi River. Like the sound of the West Coast is much more recognizable in the music of the South at this point than it is in the East Coast, because what you have that the South provides that the West Coast is also giving you is live instrumentation. And you could feel that at just about every turn. It's the live bass line. It's the way that the keyboards are played. There is not as much of a reliance on sampling and DJ tricks in order to make beats that you get coming out of the South. Sonically, when you hear this, it has a richness and a fullness to it. Also, keep it in mind that Scarface is a dude that plays a bunch of instruments and is a guy that comes up with his influences very much being in rock music, where he says the first two albums he ever had were Dynasty by Kiss and the debut album by Boston. Those are Scarface's first two records. This is a guy that grew up playing in a band with people in his family and everything else. And that's what the sound is. And so when you talk about Mike Dean is your synthesizer dude and gives you this real eerie, spooky kind of sound, right? That's what he's been known for forever. That's what defines this. So N.O. Joe, Mike Dean, and Scarface, those are really the three defining figures along with Pimp C for the sound of Houston and Southeast Texas in that time. They map out what a lot of that music is ultimately going to be and what it's going to feel like. And a lot of that points directly back to this album right here.
What are some of your all-time favorite tracks on The Diary?
So what The Diary has that is also worth noting is a bit of a dark sense of humor. Like I say, I'd have been to more wakes in the past year than the motherfucking Bengals lost last year. That's funny. It's, just about people dying, but that's funny. Ice Cube ahead of a dead body, calling Don Cornelius a house nigga and saying he's going to kill him. I laughed. 30 years later, I still laugh at this idea. Felt very harsh thing to say about Don Cornelius, but I guess I understood where he was coming from. The White Sheet kind of maps out where this whole thing is going when you listen to it. Just the idea you're going to be dead and under a sheet. Boom. That's where we're starting off. Jesse James, the character that he has had such a fascination with, that one is incredible. Jeez is a smoker. Going Down is hilarious to me because there's always a Scarface joint that is for the ladies. And just imagine Scarface coming up to holler at you. I wonder how that goes. He makes it sound like it'll be a smooth experience, though. The Minds Playing Tricks on Me 94 remix is a good one. The Diary is a good one. And the other thing that this has that is a defining feature of so many of these Scarface albums are these instrumental intros and outros that may or may not sound like what else has been going on in the record, but there's always something cinematic about a Scarface album, right? And those intros and those outros, they bookend what in this case is absolutely a movie, a dark, sometimes scary movie, but it is a movie.
Bo, let's talk about the critical reception when the album came out versus the critical reception years later.
When it was released, it was treated as a good album. And part of what you got to realize is while Scarface was the Southern rapper that people were willing to acknowledge was good, it's still a lot of hateration, holleration of Southern rap at that point. Like the idea of being able to lean into the idea that a Southerner would put out a flat out classic, I think was still a lot for a lot of people to grasp. Mainstream press, of course, still barely understood rap generally, let alone Southern rap, which seemed totally foreign to a lot of people. However, through time, this became revered as an outright classic. The Source even went back and retroactively gave it 5 mics as an acknowledgement of its status as a classic. It is one of the bedrock foundational albums, not just of Southern rap, but rap in general. You go back and listen to something like Mobb Deep's The Infamous, for example, you hear the influence from Scarface on there. You hear the influence of this record, even if it only came out a few months before that one did. Like, there's a lot of maybe what you wouldn't have termed gangster rap, but kind of that gritty, especially in New York sort of rap. You hear Scarface all over that. And this album, you hear over a lot of stuff that came out for the next few years.
What's the cultural impact, the long-lasting legacy of a record like The Diary?
I think the impact of that record was treating Southern rap with a seriousness that it hadn't been afforded up until that point. A lot of what the Ghetto Boys had done could be treated as novelty rap, right? A lot of it was shocking for the sake of being shocking, and there was a little person rapping in the group. So like you could dismiss and discard some of the things that they were doing. But this one right here, you could not do that. And part of why Scarface and the Tiny Desk were received so well is because it's with this album that he kind of begins to be treated and revered as a poet laureate. It's not just about how the music sounds and not just about how the music feels. It is the words that he uses. It is how clear and descriptive he is. It is the stories and how you can see everything that he's talking about and how relatable it was, whether it was directly tied to your life or not. Like the reason why Scarface is such a big deal in DC is that even though he's from Houston, the story he tell was something that city that is not really a hip hop city, they still could jump onto immediately and grasp and feel as though it is their own. So the cultural significance of this really is moving for a lot of people away from the idea of the gangster as a character that was having fun as much as this is the dark side of the life that we're talking about. This isn't a good time. It's just what we're doing right now. Prize Picks is really simple to play. You can make your picks and submit your entry in less than 60 seconds. Quick withdrawals, easy gameplay, and an enormous selection of players and stat types are what make Prize Picks the #1 daily fantasy sports app. So make sure you go to prizepicks.com/Bomani and use code Bomani for a first deposit match up to $100. That's prizepicks.com/Bomani. Prize Picks, daily fantasy sports made easy.